Hello everybody, this is Ohio Dan. I wanted to do a stream covering a couple of issues this weekend. And basically, I wanted to talk about a radio program that I was listening to a couple nights ago on my way back home to start off with. This isn't the main topic that I want to talk about, but I wanted to mention it. And I wonder whether you guys, for anybody that watches this, has experienced something like this within the last, I don't know, several years, or not several years, but several months, where basically somebody was doing a sports program, or I was listening to a sports program, and all of a sudden this one guy started talking about things that are kind of pretty much related to red pill issues. Specifically red pill issues in terms of female nature and kind of how our society treats male versus female interactions a lot of the time. And it kind of caught me off guard because I'm not used to listening to what we would call red pill ideas out in or on mainstream media, even sports programs and stuff like that. A lot of it's dominated by ESPN or a lot of the other media outlets that are pretty much the opposite of being red-pilled. You know, they don't tolerate anything other than the mainstream narrative, and if it's politically related, it's going to be the leftist narrative that is acceptable to them. But anyhow, I was listening to this radio program, and they were talking about, and really the subject of the actual program really doesn't matter here too much, but they were talking about James Harden. And he's an NBA player. He's played for the Houston Rockets for a number of years. And they were basically talking about how he's a selfish player. And he must be a free agent. I don't really keep up with the NBA very much, and of course the whole sports thing has been really sort of messed up, really convoluted by all the virus stuff. Hey, it's Monk Farmer. Hey, does my audio sound like it's okay? I have my fan going on the computer and everything. I'm not sure how good that's going to sound. I'm kind of trying a little bit of a different setup, but with the radio program that I was listening to, they were talking about Harden and how he is basically a selfish player, that he's a really good scorer, but he really hasn't developed the other aspects of his game at this point. And he's getting to a point where he's kind of at his peak or maybe even on the decline. Okay, thanks, Farmer. He says my audio sounds all right. And basically, this one guy, the one commentator, was comparing Harden to beautiful women. And it really caught me off guard because I didn't expect that kind of comparison from just a regular sports show. But he was talking about basically how you have two different types of people. Okay, mild white noise in the background. Yeah, I figured that would be the case. I don't know how to remove that completely, given the equipment that I have, but I suppose that's acceptable. But again, the one analyst was comparing Harden and his talent for being a really good shooter, for being just naturally very gifted at basketball, to beautiful women. And he said, you have a couple of scenarios like this where when you're young, you don't really grow up. And the scenario for Harden that he was comparing that to is you're so insanely talented. And he mentioned Des Bryant, who is a receiver in the NFL, who actually I think just signed with the Baltimore Ravens. He played with the Cowboys previously. And he used that as an example of athletes who are super talented, but they get treated so well when they're young that they don't really ever grow up. They don't really become adults. They don't really have to deal with any sort of hardship until they're on the decline. They've already peaked in their careers. And of course, this is my interpretation of what was said. The actual clip was probably like 60 seconds or so. But, you know, because they have such an insane amount of talent to start off with, they basically don't have to actually develop themselves beyond that very much until they get to a point where they start to see their numbers decline. Their talent isn't enough to offset their age anymore, or they become such a trouble spot, such a problem in the locker room that no one wants them on the team anymore. Like, they may have this insane amount of talent, but they don't really gel well with anybody else. And like they were saying about Harden, I guess he might be a free agent this year. Like I say, I didn't really look this up, but there's probably not going to be a lot of teams that want to spend that kind of money on someone that's selfish and really has not been forced to grow up to a large extent. And the one analyst compared this to young, beautiful women. And I think it took some balls to actually be able to say this, or it took some, you know, really being kind of naive about how female-centric our society is. Really, you know, the statement wasn't naive at all. It was actually red-pilled, basically. But, you know, the guy has some balls for being able to compare that to beautiful women, because he said a lot of women, when they're really young, especially the most beautiful women, they have everything handed to them, and everybody goes out of their way to want to be with them, to get their favor, and they can just model, or they can do, you know, they can, and he didn't say all of this, but, you know, this was his point. They can model, or they can use their sexual marketplace value, and again, he didn't actually use that term, to get what they want from men, and they never have to grow up. But then, and I swear, I thought he was going to say, then they run into the wall or something like that. Like, it sounded as if he had maybe heard that sort of terminology, but then he paused for a moment and said, but Father Time catches up with everybody. And then he didn't go on from that point. So I don't know whether he's heard some of this terminology, heard some red pill content or not, but to even mention that, like, it's risky to say something like that on a mainstream radio program, because if you get a few women that call in and complain about that, you know, I don't know whether his job security is still solid. I hope that it is. And again, I don't know how much of that sort of content he may have listened to, but that was his point, is that a lot of really beautiful women, and of course we know for the men that are in the men's community, the manosphere, if you want to call it that, MGTOW, we know that it really extends to most women when they're younger. If they have any sexual marketplace value at all, like, there's going to be men that want to do things for them, and, you know, it's going to be better for them when they're young until when they start to age. And as the guy on the radio program said, once Father Time catches up with them, they're kind of screwed. Just like these athletes that kind of relied on their talent rather than developing their own, not only rather than developing skills in the game, but really developing skills in life. They use that talent instead for such a long period of time, but once that starts to decrease, then people don't really want them on the team anymore. And Monk Farmer says, yeah, that's a really good comparison. Yeah, I was, like, it surprised me to hear that on a radio program more than anything else. It's like, it wouldn't surprise me to hear that kind of comparison on a MGTOW or Red Pill video, but to hear that on a, you know, mainstream radio program, it's like, he could have easily said the wall catches up with every woman or something like that, and replace and sort of in the way that he was making that statement. It really sounded to me like he was going to mention the wall itself for a second there. I should have known that he wouldn't on a mainstream program, but it surprised me that he covered that at all. So I was just, again, the main reason why I'm saying this is because it kind of caught me off guard. And I wonder if a lot of you other guys, anybody that watches this stream at some point, has experienced the same type of thing recently, where you start to hear people talk about, or maybe you're not, maybe you're not hearing these kinds of things, but some of this is bleeding into the mainstream. Some of this is potentially getting out there enough that even though there's going to be resistance to this, like I say, I wouldn't say something like that on a mainstream radio program, knowing the level of influence that women have over whether these topics are even discussed or not. But it really surprised me to hear something like that. I've heard Sunrise Hoodie and a few others talk about how, the idea of simping is out there, and that wouldn't surprise me as much. But like I say, to even mention that shows some level of awareness of how women are treated differently than men in society, and a lot of that I think has been suppressed for a really long period of time. We're all indoctrinated to believe that men and women are equal. Women can do anything men can do, and that wasn't really being disputed. But in that radio program, based on what that guy was saying, that really wasn't the issue. But just to even be able to say, hey, beautiful women, not beautiful people, not attractive men, but women in particular who are young, that are beautiful, they a lot of the time don't have to grow up, and then when they're older, father time catches up with them. And he didn't say, well, then nobody wants them after that, but that clearly was the point. That was clearly being implied. And it's just like, yep. But I'm surprised to hear you saying this on this program, So I thought that was interesting. Monk Farmer says, more and more men recognize the reality of our current situation. Watch the local news. The females are wearing more conservative clothes. Shows what times are like. Yeah. And he also says women do not like to adjust to reality and economies. The expensive player that doesn't pull their weight to better the team. Yeah, and it's just like, I think when it comes to the sports analogy, this is somewhat obvious, but it just surprised me that he made that analogy with younger, beautiful women. And like I say, he could have gone a lot farther with it. If he really had, like I say, more awareness, or again, you probably don't want to say like those kinds of things on that type of program anyway. So he may have had more knowledge and may realize that it's not just the exceptionally beautiful women that get treated special, that it's really even your average women get treated special to a degree when they're young and when they're, potentially fertile. I mean, that's sort of the more technical way of describing it, but to even mention it at all was kind of surprising. Monk Farmer says could have gone farther, but he likes his job. Yeah, like I say, I hope his job security is still intact. But I don't know. Is there a point where... I don't think there's a point where we can really start talking about that if we're the average guys out there, without the potential for blowback, for repercussions from women. But, I don't know, is it getting to a point where men are so fed up that they're actually willing to talk about that even when there's some risk? I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. I don't think our society is becoming less female-centric in that sense, but, you also have a number of women that may come out and actually pretend to agree with that and that, act like they're in a waltz too, if they're aware that things are shifting and men are getting more fed up. You do definitely have that sort of phenomenon going on too. So there may be enough women that say, yeah, that's true about the so-called beautiful women, to make it not so unpalatable that the guy's going to get canned from his job or something like that. But again, you have to be really careful about that. I would say that's probably not the case. I would be careful about saying those kinds of things, but maybe he feels like his job's secure nonetheless. Well, the main topic, aside from that sort of surprise message in that radio program that I wanted to discuss, and this is probably, for anybody that listens to this, this is probably the last major point that I'm going to make about this election between Trump and Biden that seems to be dragging on, of course, and it will until the Electoral College meets. But I wanted to go over sort of a comment, and I think it was a really good comment made on my last video. And I wanted to give sort of my reaction to that because, you know, one of the reasons why I started making content on my channel is because there's several reasons, really. But one of the reasons is really sort of insightful dialogue. You don't always get this, of course, but really being able to flesh out your ideas and see how other people respond to that, and if they can sort of add to that or highlight a particular part of it that you may have not been focused on. Really being able to continue the conversation and kind of trade knowledge with people that are actually aware of what's going on. And I wanted to go over a comment here, like I mentioned on my last election video, from Jack Harper, who I thought really made a lot of sense, and I want to kind of discuss my response because it got me to thinking about particular points, like I mentioned, that I've never, or that I wouldn't have otherwise considered. I wouldn't have thought that much about the particulars of this. Before I begin reading that comment, Monk Farmer says, economics, men can no longer afford the hypergamy and the female wants Disney syndrome. Yeah, most men can't really compete, or it's pointless to compete for that, especially when sex is so widely available. It's just like, you know, if that's really all you want to pursue, then you have the ability to pursue that if you're a guy, but then everything else is just such a wash. Like, there's just such little value in it. Monk Farmer says, they always seem to be Princess, Aladdin, Beauty, and the Beast. Yeah. She's a gold digger. Yeah, that's just... You know, it's the same thing. It's the same sort of concept, but it's getting more and more extreme. And it's getting to a point where I think a lot of men, even men that aren't fully aware of what MGTOW or men's issues may be, they're just so fed up with the whole dating and relationship game that they're just telling it like it is. As long as they feel like, you know, they can get by and not really have their well-being compromised or in trouble, put at risk, then men are more likely now, I think, to say what they want to say. It's not necessarily good. You've got to watch out because you can easily lose your livelihood in many cases. But I think men are becoming less and less afraid of whether women will still be attracted or interested in them because they realize that the whole game is just a sham. I think more men are figuring this out to some extent, at least, to some degree. So this comment on my last video from Jack Harper talking about the 2020 election, his comment was, mail-in voting was a disaster. There are too many coincidences not to be at least skeptical that the election was legitimate in these last 4 states. And I presume those 4 states were Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, and Wisconsin. I don't remember exactly, but that would make the most sense, that those are the 4 states. Black Pigeon Speaks did a good summary in his latest video on the Felix Rex channel. He basically states what I've been saying, the last 2 years is that Trump's biggest mistake was not aggressively going after the big tech censorship. The race was going to be close, but in my opinion, the Democrats cheated and the establishment has regained control. Back to the status quo. Back to military intervention, high taxes on the middle class, international trade deals working against our best interests, more draconian censorship. And then he starts a new paragraph. Having traveled the world and visited Cuba, Russia, and other former Soviet countries and spoken to people currently living under communism, who are frankly too terrified to really talk, but that in itself leaves an impression, and those who survived under communism, I'll give my prediction of what myself and the majority of Trump supporters will do next. Nothing. The Trump supporters won't be killing people in the streets or burning cities like the leftists. They will simply withdraw. This is how people survive such times of turmoil. Recognizing the nation is too far gone and lost as any pretense of election, those with the wherewithal to understand what is happening will quietly step back and remove themselves from politics and focus on themselves and loved ones. The United States that was is gone. The Republican Party does not have the balls to fight the madness, and they are simply controlled opposition at this point. Without Trump, they will obviously be toothless, and so they will lose many of us that Trump pulled back in with some hope. The system now is in decline, and as they push ever more towards socialism, the system itself will break, as it is unsustainable. Unless some innovation of automation and new iteration of economics make it all viable. Recall that there is no greater divide between the haves and have-nots than under a socialist or communist system. The silver lining being the useful idiots will suffer more than anyone else, as they always do. Welcome to the brave new 1984. Combining two different dystopian titles there together. That was well done. I thought this was a really good comment. Monk Farmer, as I was reading that, made a couple of other comments on the video here. Most of us have nothing to lose anymore, haha. Yeah, we really don't, unless, like I say, your job security is really on the line, or you have a reason to fear a false accusation or something like that, which there is reason to fear those things, of course, but like I say, more and more men are at least getting fed up in the sense that they just don't really care what women think anymore. Monk Farmer, Wisconsin has huge fraud. I live there. We know what they did. Did the same thing in 2018. I'm going to comment about that part of it later. Farmer says, I'm out. Going to do some brain cell killing YouTube. Yeah, a lot of it is brain cell killing. Possibly including my content part of the time. But to respond to what Jack Harper said, this was a really good comment. Like I say, that one of the reasons why I make content is to get feedback like that. I think that's very valuable. But one thing that I've had an issue with this 2020 election since it's been over, and even before it was over, when I was talking about how, I thought Trump was a long shot to win the election. One of the issues that I really have struggled with, to some extent, is the difference of opinion that I've had on this election compared to what I perceive, at least, as most other Trump supporters in terms of how much cheating there was or how that affected the end result of the election. And I was wrong, of course, on the polls being close, and if the polls were accurate, then Trump was going to lose by a lot and all that. I was wrong on that in the sense that the polls, of course, were not very close. They were off by 3 or 4 percentage points overall. And I've said that, it's like, I didn't know, I never made the claim that I knew the polls would be correct to begin with. But a lot of what I said in the run-up to the election was that if the polls are halfway close, Trump has no chance. That didn't turn out to be the case exactly. The polls, like I say, were off considerably. But Trump did lose, or it appears that he has lost. And one of the sort of just differences of opinion, I guess, that I've had from most other Trump supporters is I don't really see. You can talk about particular gripes. I've seen a lot of people talk about how, or some YouTube creators talk about how, the Republican monitors were not allowed in different places while the votes were being counted. And there was some shady stuff that went on. There was certain areas, mostly in the bigger cities, of course, where some illegal stuff went on. But I really am not convinced that Trump got cheated out of the election win. At least, you could argue that, well, because it was so close in certain states like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Arizona, that if anything shady went on in those particular states, which it looks like there were some things that went on that were illegal, that Trump should have won this election. And I understand these concepts. I understand you can debate some of these things either way, but it just seems like since, even before the media really called the election for Biden, really since election night, a lot of the people just said Trump got cheated on that side of the political aisle. And I've kind of sat back and looked at the evidence and watched what people have said and just, question which ballots you'd throw out and which ballots would actually be legit. What is it that Trump and others think that the Supreme Court's going to do to change anything other than order a recount? And even if you think that wouldn't produce any sort of positive results, that wouldn't change the outcome of the election, it still seems like, even compared to those Trump supporters, I still have this sort of disagreement, but I couldn't determine what the disagreement really was. And Jack Harper's comment got me thinking about what that actually related to. Like, I figured out through this comment what the sort of difference of opinion was. And the difference of opinion that I think exists between me and your average Trump voter or supporter, at least, maybe not just everybody that voted for Trump, but the people that really got into it, the people that really felt strongly about this election. The difference of opinion, I think, is in terms of the American people and the American voters themselves. See, my starting point with a lot of this I think is different than a lot of the Trump supporters' starting point. I really thought that Trump was a long shot before even really looking at the polls or even looking at how things could play out. I thought this whole time that Trump was an underdog and a long shot. And it seems to me like your average Trump supporter believed that if Trump could speak to the American people, if your average American voter was shown the facts and shown the information, that the average American voter would be capable of thinking for themselves and deciding, what, I'm not going to vote for somebody that has developing dementia. I'm not going to vote for somebody who has been in politics for 50 years. I'm not going to vote for someone who's part of the problem. I'm going to vote for the person, whether I like Trump or not. And this is, again, from the average American voter's perspective, according to what the Trump supporters were trying to actually put forth. Their interpretation of the average American voter and their capability of thinking about this election. They wanted your average voters to be able to look at this and say, I'm not going to vote for the Democratic Party. They are the problem. I'm not going to vote for more government. I'm going to vote for the person who is the reformer. I'm going to vote for the person who is trying to make a positive difference. And that's not Biden. And I'm not voting for Kamala Harris because California is a mess. We don't need that in office either. I'm going to vote for Trump, even if there are certain disagreements that I have with Trump. I think that that's what the average Trump supporter thought would happen. And I never believed that. My difference of opinion was that the average American voter is stupid and is going to listen to whatever the mainstream media is going to tell them to do. That was my starting point, and I think that is the origin of the main reason why I thought Trump was an underdog to win this election. John Murphy says, greetings. Hey, what's up? I'm glad you're watching this because you're one of the active commenters. You're one of the viewers that's actively discusses these issues on the videos that I make. So I'm glad that you were able to watch this stream. My view of the average voter is the average voter has no capacity or very little capacity to make a decision for themselves. They either believed everything Trump said or they believed everything the mainstream media said. And the mainstream media has gone on a campaign since Trump got elected in 2016 of disinformation, saying that, the election was rigged in terms of Russia's involvement. Russia bought the election for Trump, in other words. The mainstream media has been all about how Trump is bad, the Democrats are good, Biden, is a good alternative to Trump. He's a nice guy. The Democrats, they just don't want this hateful, racist man in office. All this BS. The media has been spoon-feeding people with this for 4 freaking years. And, the Trump supporters, like I said, your average Trump supporters thought that the average voter would be able to see through this. And I never did. I thought from the beginning that Trump would probably lose because your average American voter is retarded. I hate to say that, but that's the way I see it. Now, was I somewhat wrong about that since Trump made this a very close election? Yeah, it looks like there are at least a number of people that did see through it, that realized that Biden is not going to reform anything, that he's just going to be a figurehead, that you have basically a Marxist from California along with the DNC that's going to run the country if the Biden ticket won. I think and you could argue, of course, what the particular reasons were. This is just kind of a thought process of what those reasons might have been for why your average voter, not your average voter, but many voters still supported Trump. Even the people that aren't hardcore into politics and don't just vote Republican all the time, because there are a number of people on both sides that'll just vote the same way every time and not put any thought into it. But it does seem like there are a number of people that did not fall for what the media was trying to sell them. But in my view, enough of them did still to vote for Biden. And yes, you still need to have those conversations about Wisconsin, about Pennsylvania, about Arizona, about Georgia. Was there enough voter fraud to where certain ballots need to be thrown out if we can prove that they need to be thrown out? And do we need to do a statewide recount? And, is there enough general evidence to say that the election was just rigged? But ultimately, my view from the beginning was that Trump was a long shot to win this because people in this country are too far gone. And the part about, Jack Harper's comment was really insightful, but the part about how Trump supporters are just going to walk away from the system, that people are going to focus more on their family and loved ones. This is what happens in a society when people, the decent people who are left, know that there's very little they can do to fix the system. And I thought about that, and I realized I was already at that point. That was the aha moment for me with that, is that I realized that even before the 2016 election, from the time around 2014 and 2015, when I became red-pilled, so to speak, really starting off with the way things stand with marriage between men and women, the sort of skewed nature of that whole association now. That was the starting point for me in terms of a lot of the red pill stuff. But really, in my late 20s, around that time period, I started to wake up to several different things. And I'm not saying that I know it all now, of course not. Donald, I'm sorry, I don't know that I can pronounce your last name. Goebbels? You were right, Dan. I didn't believe it, but you were right. Well, I'm not glad that I was right about this election. And you can, of course, say that I didn't think it would be that close. And to an extent, I wasn't right in terms of how close the election would be. But I felt pretty confident that Trump was going to lose. Or confident's not the right word, but pretty kind of dismayed, I guess, that Trump was probably going to lose. I just didn't think it was going to happen for Trump this time because there were, again, what was the main reason that he won in 2016? You could say, well, they weren't ready to fix the election. But really, if they could fix the election between him and Hillary, why didn't they? It's like, in other words, if they could do it now, why didn't they do it in 2016? So I really didn't think that the Dems were going to fix the election. Now, maybe it was so close in some of these states that I'm wrong, and you can do a recount and somehow that changes the outcome, or there's specific evidence. But even if there's specific evidence that there was cheating, what are you going to do? Do the whole election over again? That's not going to happen. So, even the thing that really, it didn't frustrate me, but the thing that really sort of got me to realize that I had a difference of opinion on this was right after the election, like the next day, people were saying Trump got cheated, just immediately. And I think the reason why people are doing that is because they really believed that the American people would vote for Trump. They really thought your average Trump supporters out there, or at least the ones that are really vocal Trump supporters, maybe, that's not the same thing, but a lot of the Trump supporters out there that have commented on my videos and have not agreed with me on this, I think they really believe that the American people were smart enough to vote for Trump. They were smart enough to see through all the bullshit. That they would think for themselves enough to realize that they didn't want someone like Biden in office. And I never thought that. I thought from the beginning that the American voter is stupid. And this isn't really directly related to men's issues and whatnot, but Hammerhand put up a graphic, one of his posts on his channel, that showed what the Electoral College would look like, what the United States map, I guess, would look like in terms of which state went for Trump versus Biden if only men voted versus if only women voted. And, it didn't surprise me, but it really just puts it all out there to show those maps, because if only women voted, Biden would have won in a landslide. If only men voted, Trump would have won in a landslide. And again, I'm not saying that there aren't, of course, conservative females that would vote for Trump or women that could see through this. And there are a lot of men that can't. There are a lot of men that, support Bernie Sanders and all that. And if that's your thing, I'm not trying to pick on you, but for whoever watches this, but, the people, the average voter, especially once you factor in women, and I hate to put it this way, but it's the truth, is driven by their emotions. They believe whatever they're told. And yeah, some of them may believe what Trump says, but most of them are going to believe what the legacy media tells them. And then they're just going to go out there and they're going to vote for, a senile man who's been in politics for 50 years and wants to grow the size of government, and the people around him who are Marxists and will, essentially do everything they can to continue to divide and conquer with different groups of people, as I've discussed in other videos. And I don't want to get into that too much here, but in terms of, well, if you're in this category based on race or gender or sexual orientation or religion, you're bad. And if you're in this other category, you're good. And you're just going to see more of that. It's cultural Marxism. Again, I don't want to go into much detail with that here because that wasn't my intended subject, but maybe I should make notes even before doing some of these live streams. But I feel like if I'm going to be talking for an hour or whatnot, that gives me time to really cover all the bases anyway. But like I say, this was a really good comment from Jack Harper on my last video, because it got me thinking, okay, I agree with most of what he's saying. I don't know if I would say the Dems rigged the election or that it was enough to really fix the election in favor of Biden. It could be. Enough of the states were close that you could argue that Trump would have won if the election hadn't been, mishandled or corrupted by a lot of these pro-Biden people, a lot of these people that may have cheated in different areas, especially the bigger cities. But my view from the beginning was that the Democratic Party really doesn't need to cheat. They didn't need to coordinate things so that they cheated in every area in this election just to win. My view was, yeah, Trump may have a chance, but most of your voters are going to vote for Biden probably because they're retarded, and they're going to vote for whoever they're told to vote for by the media. The indoctrination is just... And to be fair, I guess this is fair, if you are... if the indoctrination or the influence over you is so strong in terms of getting you to think a certain way about any issue, the vast majority of people are going to break. The vast majority of people are not going to be able to move beyond that, and really probably everybody. If the influence is so incredibly strong and unified that you must think a certain way about a certain issue, you're probably not going to be willing to go outside of that. But ultimately, you really have a lot of these a lot of these Trump supporters that just think if the American people would have listened, or if Trump can reach them, that they'll vote for Trump. And I didn't think that was ever really going to happen. Heart Donor says, Dan, you need to wake up. They clearly cheated. Well, I'm not saying they didn't, but I am saying that I don't see solid evidence that's going to overturn anything. And like I say, I think our starting points, Heart Donor, in terms of how we looked at this election were different. I mean, I can't say that I know what you believe about... Well, let me ask you. Do you think that the average voter in the United States is smart enough that if they were given reasonable, logical information from both sides, that they would support Trump? Because I just think that most people are incapable of doing that. Especially, again, it's not all this, but especially the female voters. They'll just go with their feelings. They'll go with big government. They'll just say orange man bad because that's what they've been taught. And I think a lot of people thought that a lot of the Trump supporters thought that Trump would be able to overcome that the people would resist that sort of programming enough because they'd be smart enough and use enough common sense to vote for Trump anyway. And I don't think so. I never thought that the people were smart enough to do that. And I think our society is just too far gone. And again, that's the thing about the comment that I mentioned, is that a lot of the people now, as Jack Harper said in his comment, will probably withdraw and just remove themselves from politics because they realize that there's really... all they're going to do, basically, and this is my interpretation, of course, of what he said, but all they're going to do is make themselves a target. Okay, so Heart Donor says, yeah, the average voter has low intelligence. All right. So why did the Democrats need to cheat? If the average voter had low intelligence, why do you think Trump would have won anyway, without the cheating that you're saying went on? And again, I'm not saying it didn't happen, but I don't think that it swung the election. I really don't. My view is that it's possible because some of the states were so close, like Georgia and Arizona. But even if Georgia and Arizona went to Trump, or even if Georgia and Pennsylvania went to Trump, Biden still has the electoral vote. So enough of these states would have had to change by like 1 percentage point or more through the cheating. And we're talking about tens of thousands of votes that would actually have to be thrown out to change the election. So the question to me is, were tens of thousands of votes in each state, in each of these states, or at least 3 out of 4 of the states that Trump needed to win, that they're saying that Biden won, was there enough corruption to throw out those many votes, or to add enough votes for Trump that would amount to tens of thousands of votes? I don't see that. I really don't. It's possible mathematically or whatever. Like, you can't. It's impossible to do the calculation because you don't know exactly what you're dealing with, and you don't know the exact level, the precise level of corruption. But my take on it is, guys, and you can disagree with this if you want, of course, is that Trump was a long shot to win. And a lot of people were saying Trump will win in a landslide, and it's just like, there was no way that was going to happen because of all the indoctrination, and because of the nature of this election versus 2016 when Trump went against Hillary. So, you know, I just think that this is more about where we're at as a society than it is about cheating. You know, if we were in a good place in terms of people wanting real reform and knowing what was going on in our political system and being able to think for themselves, you know, Biden wouldn't have even needed to win. Or I'm sorry, he wouldn't have needed to cheat. Like, it would have just been over. Trump would have won in a landslide. There would have been nothing that the Democrats could have done to change that except just really commit fraud way beyond what we're seeing here. But a lot of what I see, guys, and again, I know a lot of people will probably disagree with this, and that's all right, is, well, this person said that the USPS was told to backdate certain ballots. And it's like, that doesn't mean shit. You can't prove that happened. You actually have to be able to show why tens of thousands of ballots need to be thrown out, or do the recount and hope for a different result. But that's really the only change that you would see. And like I say, a part of it is my sort of mental, and I didn't realize this at first, but this is my starting point mentally, is that Trump was a long shot in the first place. So yes, Trump did better in the election than I thought that he would do. And you could make the case that, well, maybe we need to do a recount in all 4 of these states. Maybe certain ballots need to be thrown out. But I don't see it swinging anything. John Murphy says, I think Trump's team is not conceding and buying time until January when Amendment 12 says the House votes 1 vote per state. Yeah, you know, I did a little bit of research on that in terms of what would happen if no one won the Electoral College. And that was actually going to be a part 2 to my last video. But I didn't realize that Georgia and Pennsylvania had fallen into Biden's hands, or supposedly into Biden's hands. So you're right. I noticed that too. If it went to the House because no one won a majority in the Electoral College, and if Biden had one faithless elector, because he would only have 270 electoral votes if Pennsylvania and Georgia had remained in Trump's hands. If there was even one faithless elector that didn't vote for Biden because they didn't do what they were supposed to do for any reason, it wouldn't matter the number of electoral votes Trump had. It would go to the House, and then each state would get 1 vote, and 26 out of 50 states have more Republican representatives than Democrats. Even though the Dems have the majority in the House overall, that doesn't matter. Each state gets 1 vote. So you're right that it could go to that, but the Electoral College is going to meet before that in December sometime, right? So that's the problem with that, is that, well, unless the Electoral College doesn't meet, which I assume that it will, they're going to vote for Biden in all likelihood, and then it's over. Biden has like 290 electoral votes now, even without Georgia. So even if Georgia does a recount and all that, it's like, and Trump wins it somehow, it's just there's not going to be that many faithless electors. And I don't see why the Electoral College wouldn't meet before January. So you're right, if it would go to the House, they'd probably vote for Trump. But that was going to be kind of the topic in the second part of my last video, but then I didn't even post it because it was, Biden won other states, and then it was basically you're not going to overcome that with faithless electors. So Eccentric says Dems did not cheat in 2016 because they thought they had it won with no votes in reserve in case of need. This time big cities had votes to pull out to change the state. Well, that's possible, but again, you have to prove it definitively. And I'm not saying this to be an asshole. I'm not, but I'm saying this from the perspective of, if you're going to try to change this in court, you need to have that sort of solid evidence. You could be right. Like in 2016, they thought Hillary was going to win, but I don't know about that. The polls were reasonably close. I think that I kind of think that if the Dems were going to fix this election, they would have tried to fix it in 2016 as well. But that election's gone, and this election's really over with too, except for the Electoral College meeting and stuff like that. So we'll see how it plays out, but I don't see anything changing in this election. But you could be right that the Dems didn't cheat in 2016 because they thought they would win. They were overconfident, but I don't know if they were that overconfident. If they could have fixed it, I think they probably would have tried. And nonetheless, though, Heart Donor says there is always fraud in the election. Yeah, that's true. And that's kind of part of the point that I'm making, is if there's always fraud, then the fraud has to be significant enough that they can actually say, all right, honestly, there's no way that Biden won this in a legit fashion. That's actually kind of the point that I've tried to make, is if there's always fraud, then you have to show how there's fraud that goes above and beyond just sort of the normal level bullshit. So it's possible that, if there was no fraud whatsoever, that Trump could have won. But I'm really not convinced of that, to be honest. And like I say, I think it's because my starting point is the American people were duped into voting for Biden in a lot of ways because they're too dumb to think for themselves. I know that's an asshole kind of way of putting it, but that's how I see the average voter at this point. John Murphy says, I think the red flag is stop counting the votes on election day and then wake up the next day. Biden has a ton new votes. Yeah, I've thought about that. The thing about that is, and this is my position, if you want to get rid of the possibility of voter fraud, not altogether, but the main sort of instrument of voting fraud in this election, you have to get rid of the mail-in ballots. See, the reason that's going to be given, and I think this is a real reason for why things changed overnight like that when it looked like Trump was ahead in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Georgia. It looked like Trump was going to win all 4 of those states. And then Michigan didn't even end up being very close. What you have to realize is a lot of these mail-in ballots that these really high population areas, your urban areas got, they were going to take forever to count. Even if they started at the beginning of Election Day counting the votes, these areas were really going to take a long time to be able to report their votes. So it makes sense that the rural areas get done counting all of their votes first, unless, they have a lot more workers in the urban areas to make up for this, but I don't think it would. You didn't have nearly the number of votes in all these rural precincts, and so all these results got in on election night, but then these massive precincts where they have, I'm sure, a huge number of mail-in ballots, not only does that increase your opportunity for corruption, but it's just going to take a long damn time to count all those ballots. So the reason why I say this, guys, is because I looked at Pennsylvania on election night, and this was like 2 or 3 in the morning after Heartburn's. I watched Heartburn, if you've watched his channel at all, his election coverage, his stream, and I looked at Pennsylvania on the map, broken down by county. I looked at the county by county map, and Trump was ahead by like 5% or something like that still. And I looked at it and I thought, oh crap. When you looked at the number of precincts reporting in all the rural areas, it was close to 100% in a lot of the rural areas. And then if you looked at Pittsburgh and Philadelphia and the counties surrounding those urban conglomerates, urban conurbations, like it was less than 50% that was reporting. And I remember looking at that and saying, oh crap. There's a chance Pennsylvania could switch because all these urban areas, the votes are going to be massively for Biden. So, and that did end up happening. Now, was there still corruption and cheating on top of that? Possibly. But again, it doesn't surprise me that it at least moved back toward Biden in terms of the results because the urban areas were the last ones to come in. Now, you could say there was corruption involved with some of that, but it does make sense that they would go overwhelmingly for Biden. Gary Lewis says, do you think the House of Representatives will decide who the winner will be? No, because I think the Electoral College will decide. I think that, I don't know what's going to come out of the sort of legal challenges, but I don't see a lot happening other than maybe a statewide recount. And there's time to do that before before the Electoral College meets. And really, I think the only state that will most likely do that is Georgia because it's closer there than anywhere else, and maybe Arizona. So, the only way that it would come down to the House is if the Electoral College, for whatever reason, cannot decide. Biden doesn't get 270 electoral votes. And it doesn't matter what the total would be. Biden could have 269 and Trump could have 210. It wouldn't matter. Unless the Electoral College fails to vote for Biden, it won't go to the House. If that's the case, then it will. But that's really not... there's no reason to expect that would happen as things stand right now, unless, like I say, Georgia does a recount and they go for Trump, and Pennsylvania throws out a whole bunch of votes, probably hundreds of thousands of votes, and then they do a recount and it goes for Trump. And then at that point, Biden only has 270 electoral votes, or 270 allocated votes, people that are supposed to vote for him. And then one of them is a faithless elector. Only if something crazy like that would happen would it go to the House. So I don't perceive that happening at this point, unless, like I say, states get overturned somehow. But I don't think that's going to happen. John Murphy says, the Dominion software was created in association with Hillary Clinton allies. I'm sorry, I don't really know what the Dominion software is. Maybe that's something I should know about. But like I say, is that some of the programming for the voting machines? Is that the programming that a lot of them used in some of these states? Heart Donor says, do you think Biden got more votes than Obama? Yes, I do. And that's been another thing that it's just like, there's actually a large difference. I think Obama in 2008, he got more votes in 2008 than 2012. And I think he got 72 million in some votes in 2008. And Biden supposedly has 78 million in some. And 2020. So, the thing about it is, this election is different than 2016. And this was a point that I tried to make in the run-up to the election with some of the other videos, is that in 2016, not only was there a perception that Trump couldn't win, and so people didn't vote because they didn't think that the election was really going to be that close, But a lot of people hated both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. A lot of people just said, I'm not going to vote. Or Gary Johnson did a lot better in the 2016 election as well versus Joe Jorgensen, the Libertarian candidate, in this election. So this election, people thought that it would be contentious. They thought that it would be more competitive. But also, more people really have been polarized to either like or hate Trump. You've got to realize that most of the Biden voters are votes against Trump. And when you realize that, and you realize how contentious and polarized this election was compared to 2016. 2016 was highly polarized, but it was in more of a which candidate do you hate less, kind of way. And you're not going to have the voter turnout for that. You've also got to realize that the population overall in this country has gone up, each election cycle. It goes up to some extent. Now, you can question where that's coming from. It's coming from certain strata, social strata, more than others. But our population at least is going up to some extent. That made somewhat of a difference. And you can look at, like I say, the 2012 election didn't see the same turnout as 2008 for Obama. Why is that? Well, people either got sick of Obama and realized that he wasn't going to be what they thought he was going to be, or they just didn't think Romney had any chance. And basically, he didn't. So you've got to factor in people's overall perception of how the election's going to play out, not just in terms of whether they like that candidate or not, but really how they see the election. This election, with the media and with Trump himself going at it, going after one another, you have a whole bunch of people that wanted Trump to win and a whole bunch of people that wanted Trump to lose. And those people voted for Biden. And like I mentioned, with people like people who would question, well, why do you think that Biden will win when you see all of these Trump supporters at these rallies and you don't see hardly anybody at Biden rallies? Well, it's because no one really likes Biden. They're just voting against Trump. But that didn't mean that Biden wasn't going to win the election. And I tried to highlight that in the past as well, in other videos as well. And it just, I guess I didn't do a very good job of it, or I'm not very convincing. But I get it, guys. I get you can say this election was close, and if there was even a moderate amount of cheating, that could have swung the election toward Biden in some of these close states. I just think that it was the American people being foolish. Honestly, that's more my perception of it. It's good that Trump still made it very close, but I'm not convinced that even though there was corruption, and like Heart Donor says, there's always going to be, every election has some corruption, but, or fraud, he says, there's always fraud in some election, but, any given election, but I'm not convinced that swung things. I think that the hard reality is that people are just not smart enough to think for themselves and get beyond what the media tells them to do. And that's why 78 million people voted for Biden. Even if you want to say that some of those people really didn't, a huge number of people voted for Biden, who is a senile old man and who has supported big government for decades. And, how long will he even be in office until Harris takes his place? He could complete his term. I could be wrong on that, but I doubt it. Heart Donor also says, also, you do know that a lot of ballots were trashed and burned. Well, that could be, but you actually have to prove that beyond any sort of doubt. And, again, I'm not trying to be condescending here, but I just really don't believe it. I think that you've got to be able to dissect the people that are always going to say something like this because their candidate didn't win versus the hard proof. And there is some proof. There is some evidence that people cheated in certain places. But was it enough to really swing anything in the election? And And the only state I think that is that close is Georgia, to be honest. And even if that's the case, can you prove it? Can you actually undo any of this stuff that's been done? Like I say, guys, the main point that I wanted to make with this is that even if you disagree with me and think that the election could have gone to Trump, and it could have, if certain corruption hadn't been in place, certain things didn't happen, certain illegal activities, I'm not denying that those things happened. But my starting point, I think, is different than the starting point of a lot of the other Trump supporters. And I think that that's okay. I'm used to being different. I'm used to having differences of opinion with people. But I couldn't identify what precisely that was with this issue, because it just seemed like a lot of Trump supporters believed that he was going to win in a landslide. And I kept saying, well, there's a lot of evidence that that may not happen. But again, for me, a big part of it was I didn't have faith in the American people in terms of electing Trump. And some of my kind of personal experiences that I mentioned in my other live stream, that with family members who, and even my video on the Democratic Party, about how, honestly, if you're white, male, conservative, straight, you have no business voting for the Democratic Party at all, because they hate you, and you're just going to be a useful idiot in their camp, because they will vote against your interests. They hate you because they are all about saying that you're an oppressor, because they've embraced Marxism to a large extent. They've embraced that sort of dichotomy of oppressor versus oppressed. And if you fit those categories, you will be seen as an oppressor. Even in that video, that was a reflection of certain people in my family who I know are conservative. They're white. I'm white. They're conservative, white, male, Christian people. And even for the female members of my family that were saying they're going to vote for Biden, it's like that's not enough to really put you in that oppressed category, according to the Democrats. They're still going to see you as bad. They buy whatever CNN and MSNBC tells them. One of my relatives said, and I'm not trying to be mean, like I care about my family, and generally these people are not dumb in terms of skills and in terms of the value that they have and the career path that they've chosen. Like, they're not dumb in terms of IQ necessarily, but one of them said, I'm not against Republicans and I'm not against Democrats, but I am against Trump. And it's just like, you are stupid when it comes to politics. If anything, you should be against Republicans, against Democrats, and for Trump, because he's the only reasonable alternative in terms of having a positive effect on the system. Hey, Reverend 20 Piece is watching my stream. Hey, what's up, Dan? Just got here. Yeah, I was hoping that you'd listen to part of this at some point. I'm trying to make the case for why it is that a lot of my views, I think, have been different than a lot of the other Trump supporters in terms of analyzing this election. And what I've tried to say is basically my starting point was that we're in a bad position to begin with. Like, I'm already at a point, as with the comment that I read from my last video, I'm already at a point where I've pretty much given up on the political system. I make videos about this, because I kind of have a background in political science and whatnot, and this kind of stuff interests me. It always has. But I don't think that we're going to reform anything. I think things are going to continue to go downhill. I think that we're at a point where the average American voter is too stupid to think for themselves and realize that a man with dementia who can't string 3 sentences together, who has been in politics forever and has always supported big government, and his communist running mate from California, and that's being mean, to call her that without backing that up, but that's how I feel about it. That's not a good solution for this country. That you're better off going with someone that actually wants to reform policies in a positive way. And Trump, I don't agree with Trump on everything, and Trump definitely has his flaws, but clearly, for anybody that looks at what's going on and thinks that Trump is really the problem, those people are just useful idiots, or they benefit from what the Democratic Party believes because they fall into the so-called oppressed categories. That I can understand. At least you're looking after your short-term self-interest. But it's still not very wise. But my viewpoint was that the average American voter have been indoctrinated by the mainstream media for 4 years that Orange Man is bad. Trump is bad. And you have so many people that just can't think for themselves, really on both sides. But in this case, the key is, the Biden voters. My perspective from the beginning was that Trump was a long shot to win because of the average American's stupidity and inability to assess things themselves and see things outside of what sort of information they're spoon-fed. And the election was a lot closer than I thought, so that actually leads me to being more hopeful than I was in a way. But then again, Biden is still going to be president. So, and some of the other things while I'm thinking about this, before I lose my thought completely, some of the other things that led me into thinking in this direction include things like the coronavirus. Look at the average person's response to this coronavirus stuff. Like, even if you think that wearing a mask is a good idea or something like that, even allowing for a variety of different opinions and perspectives, what does it do in the long run to force everybody to wear a mask or force everyone to stay at home when you don't have a cure? What does that do? It just slows down the inevitable process of people getting it anyway. And here we are. We have all these mask mandates everywhere. Not literally everywhere, but in my state, in Ohio, and a lot of other states too. I don't know about you, Rev, with where you're at, whether you're forced to wear a mask everywhere, but it's just like most states are doing this, and guess what? It's out of control more than ever anyway, because it's super contagious, and that doesn't stop it. It's not enough to really stop the disease. So, look at people's reaction. I wear a mask. I save lives. Are you freaking serious? Why would you think that doing that, staying at home, is saving lives? Well, I'll say this. Staying at home and saving lives, you have a better chance at saving a life by staying at home by not getting in an auto accident with someone and not having a fatality in an auto accident than you do from giving someone the freaking coronavirus. There's more of a chance of something bad like that happening than giving someone the coronavirus and that person freaking dying from it. I mean, let's just be honest. That just doesn't make sense to think that you're saving lives, but it makes you feel better about it. And most people today, when it comes to where they view things politically, just like everything else, and again, I hate to say it, but especially when you factor in women, they care more about their feelings. They factor in their feelings. They don't think logically. They don't use common sense. And so they think, yeah, everybody just needs to wear a mask forever, and somehow that's going to solve the coronavirus. And that's part of the process that really got me thinking that, and I kind of, had this mentality to some extent for a long time anyway, but this is part of the process that led me to think that, what? The average American person's not going to vote for Trump. And more of them did than I thought they would. And that's actually a positive thing, but I really felt like Biden was by far the favorite to win, not because the mainstream media and the polls factored somewhat into my thinking because they're so one-sided, but I just figured, hey, people are stupid. They're going to vote for whoever they're told to vote for because they feel like they're on the winning team, or they feel like Trump's bad. We have to vote against him. And guess what? It looks like that's what's happened. Unless, again, you want to say that you think the cheating was enough that swung the election that way. I'm not really of that opinion. Reverend 20p says, I agree that we are in the final stages of our current system. I don't think it can be reformed. I read that essay that you sent me before we did our live stream with Sunrise Hoodie several months ago now. And I don't remember all the details, but there were things that I agreed with in that essay about how, different empires come unraveled after, 250 years, 200 to 300 years or something like that. And there were parts that I agreed with and parts that I didn't. I think the problem in our current system and the reason why we're at where we're at is because we have become so foolish with who we allow to have power over our political system. In other words, I believe in a constitutional republic, not democracy. And a lot of people may not like that. To me, that's kind of a political red pill in itself, that democracy is not that great. But I think that the system is becoming unraveled because of social engineering and basically our leaders, and especially the people that really have wealth and power, knowing that if they get the average person to be so stupid, as they are, I think, in this society, that they will vote for whoever they tell them to vote for. And that, to me, is a part of it. But I'm gonna read through that essay again one of these days, The Fate of Empires by Sir John Glubb. Yeah. Because there were a couple of points that I disagreed with on that. One that I remember is that he really picked convenient dates for his empires. Like, he split the Roman Empire and the Roman Republic up so that he could say they lasted or were, in power for around the same amount of time as some of the others that he mentioned. But really, the Byzantine Empire lasted for over 1,000 years after that. Now, it was in decline for a long period of time, but I think he kind of fixed the numbers, to be honest, from what I remember. But there were a couple of other points that I agreed with and some that I disagreed with. I do think that each empire, each civilization does run its course, but I think that there are things you can do to speed that up or slow that down depending on how well your system works. That's one of the thoughts that I remember having about that. I don't think it's inevitable that it's after this particular period of time that you're going to fail. And I think our system's failing because, like I say, we're overly democratic. We basically have mob rule at this point. Some people may agree with that, some people may disagree, but I did read through that article back in May or June or whenever it was, but I'll have to read through it again and give you a more comprehensive kind of response to that. Donald Goebbels, again, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your last name right. I feel like I'm probably not. Says, senile old kid toucher. Yeah, I wonder if assuming that Biden gets put in power, and assuming the Electoral College votes for Biden and Harris, if they can't try to get Biden out, like if he doesn't step down after a certain point, and they can't use the whole, well, he's incapacitated because he's lost his mind thing, if he doesn't do it for health reasons, in other words, they may try to Me Too him or do something similar to Biden. I've thought about, how that might happen. I mean, it's possible Biden could serve 4 years. I don't see that happening. I think if I had to bet one way or the other on it, I would say Biden will not finish his term. Because he's old, because he's losing his mind, but also because he's inconvenient. He doesn't represent what the Democratic Party is about today. Democratic Party is not about old white men. I mean, I'll just flat out say it. They're about the groups of people that they know that they can count on votes from, and that's not old white men for the most part. But Harris can really galvanize their base. And if you are aware of things like female-owned group preference, I don't know how many of my viewers watch some of the men's issues content, the MGTOW content that I've made in the past, but women will vote, they'll support Harris if she's president a lot. Now, there are women that voted against Hillary and voted for Trump in 2016 and all that, but he would better galvanize, or she would better galvanize their support base around a very hardcore leftist way of thinking. She would probably get a lot more of the Bernie voters to support her and stuff. And then, like I say, the women, the other, people of different racial groups, they would probably support her more because she's not an old white guy. And of course you can use the opposite logic with Republicans that, the old white guys belong in the Republican Party, I guess. But, I'm not trying to make it into a strictly racial thing, but Harris would better be a leader for the Democratic Party based on what they want to do than Biden is. And they may use some sort of Me Too / mental incompetence strategy once Biden actually becomes president, if things don't change, to get rid of him, to get him out of office, if they can't just convince him to resign or whatever. So, they didn't talk about that. The media didn't want to talk about that at all, or Hunter Biden and any of that corruption. That could resurface once Biden becomes president as well, if they want to get rid of him. But if they don't, then they probably, will just put up with it. We'll see if anything comes of that. But some of the stuff that Biden has kind of been able to hide from, once he becomes president, if the Democratic Party wants him out of there, can they use the media to help them do that? Once that becomes their goal, that'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Reverend 20 says, and I'm way behind the comments, guys. I'm sorry. I'm rambling on so much with some of my ideas and thoughts that Reverend 20 says, with the corona, mainstream media is promoting that it's out of control. Alt media is reporting that it's just the opposite. Yeah. It's probably out of control in the sense that there are more cases now. I think that is probably true. And again, you could talk about how much of those statistics are fake and how much of those statistics are based on actual COVID deaths and COVID infections. But the thing is, it doesn't change anything. We don't have the cure. Pfizer is maybe in the process of developing a cure, but only if it actually works. And they don't really even know. It's going to take a long time until there's actually a cure that's available to average people. And then some people aren't going to want to take the vaccines, and I can understand that, but most people will when it's available. But how many months or years is that going to be? And in the meantime, it's just like, oh, we'll just wear our mask and that'll solve the problem because we're saving lives. It's just there's no reason to think that's actually the case. It's just trading long-term suffering for not having to suffer as much in the short run, even though the virus is not in control anyway. What are we gaining by this? And that's my issue with it. I've talked ad nauseum about that, though, so I don't need to get into that too much more. John Murphy says, how about more votes than registered voters in many districts? Oh, I skipped one of Reverend 20 Piece's comments about Arkansas. I'll get back to that, though. Yeah, you're right. That's corruption. Like, if you can show, well, hey, that doesn't make sense to have more votes in this precinct or this district than registered voters, that doesn't make sense. But then again, you have to say these particular votes have to be thrown out. Or, again, you have to show this adds up to enough votes that would actually swing a state a different way if these votes would get thrown out. So you're not wrong. I'm not saying I can prove that you're wrong. I can't. But, would that have really changed the result? Or are the American people just stupid enough to vote for Biden? That's really the difference of opinion that I think I have with some of you guys on this. And that's fine, and you guys can disagree, or you can think that I'm not putting enough value on the potential corruption and potential for the election being fixed and all that. maybe that's true. Maybe I'm not emphasizing that enough, or I don't think that would have had it, like the effects are greater than what I thought that they would be, but I don't see it. I honestly think that it's more about, a lot of it is more about Trump supporters thought that people would see the light. They hoped that enough people would vote for Trump because they would realize that they were being lied to, and not enough people realized that because American voters are stupid. That's my interpretation of it. Yeah, Reverend 20 Piece says, Dan, here in Arkansas, life seems normal, at least to me, other than the mask. So there is a mask mandate in Arkansas then, but that's kind of how it is in Ohio too, in terms of, businesses being open. A lot of the small businesses just haven't opened back up, or they're on limited hours and stuff like that too. So there are some changes, but the mask mandate's the main thing going on in Ohio as well. But there's been talk from our governor about shutting different places down and stuff because he's a rhino, Governor DeWine. He's a Republican, but a lot of these Republican governors, supposedly conservative governors, are doing all this stuff too. So I'm not very impressed with our two-party system in terms of Republicans being steadfast in actually supporting small government and stuff like that. Heart Donor says, I talk to people about how they feel about Trump, and they don't have any reason why they hate him. They are like you, said news manipulated. Well, maybe there are people that kind of agree with what I'm saying. Maybe that's, just me kind of paying attention to comments from people that disagree with me and whatnot. Again, I'm kind of used to that anyway, but I couldn't determine what that difference of opinion was. Why is it that I don't think that I really I just don't think they needed to cheat. I think that people are dumb enough that they kind of they would just vote for Biden anyway. And yes, I believe that Biden got more votes than any other candidate ever because people think Orange Man bad because that's what the media has told them. So, I didn't, especially compared to the Trump supporters that really thought Trump was going to win. Some of them said that Trump would win in a landslide. And I tried saying, one person got mad and said, I'm going to unsub from you. I hope other Trump supporters don't think the way you do. And it's like, okay, it's kind of a weird reason to unsub because we're on the same team. We're not on a different team. I want Trump to win badly because I think he's by far the better option than Biden. But I still didn't, it's like I look at the polls, and the polls ended up being generally wrong, but the outcome was the same. And I basically said, all right, you guys can think that Trump's going to win in a landslide, but I don't think people are going to do that. They're going to vote for whoever the media tells. I didn't put it into words at that point, but that was my underlying thought process. I didn't have faith in the American people to choose who should have been the obviously better candidate over all of the propaganda and bullshit that they were being fed. And more of them did see through it than I thought, or they just, got on the Trump train. That doesn't necessarily mean that they were doing a cost-benefit analysis of having each person in office or, actually doing their own research and their own thinking. They may have just got on the Trump train because you have that going on too. It's not as powerful as the mainstream media indoctrinating people, but you have people on both sides that aren't necessarily thinking about why they believe the way they do. And you have people that will just vote Republican or people who just vote Democrat too, regardless of what the media says, because they believe that one party is the righteous party over the other party. But my thought process from the beginning was Trump was a long shot to win because people are stupid. And they were a little bit smarter than I thought they would be as a whole, but, you know, we're still not getting the desired outcome from this election. Reverend 20p says, Dan Glove's dates could be off, but his main point seemed to be that history is cyclical and human civilizations rarely learn from their mistakes. Yeah, I agree with that part of it. I agree with that sort of concept. From what I remember, though, like I say, my main point of disagreement was with the dates, and I can't remember what the other sort of point of disagreement was. I think it had to do with his perspective. I think he almost said that when you have an empire that basically conquers everything, life is better. I think that was kind of part of what he was trying to say, is when you have this decline and you don't have another empire that takes its place, that trade is impacted in a negative way, and it's actually good when you have an empire. I kind of disagreed with that. It sounded like he kind of was for an imperial, sort of a pro-imperialism type of thinking, and I kind of disagree with that view. I think we're actually better off without having big government at all. But you're right. I agree that there is this cycle. We don't learn from history. There are specific phases, like what he got into, that you can look at. I just don't think the timetable is definitive. I think that you can sort of increase your lifespan for your civilization or decrease it by making certain choices. I think for the United States and Western civilization, and I hate to sound like, this isn't meant to be a sort of feminist-related video, but, the 19th Amendment was a big part of that. And like I say, you could look at the maps that Hammerhand brought up, if only women voted versus if only men voted in this last election. And that's not all of it. And I'm not saying every woman should be disenfranchised. That's not really my point of view either. But when you allow the people that don't think for themselves to have control, basically, over who gets elected, not real control, but, supposed, superficial control over who's in power, what do you think they're going to do? They're going to vote for free stuff. They're going to vote for, going into massive debt. They don't care. They're going to vote for, leaders that don't really respect people's rights. That's just the way it is. It's not just a male versus female thing, but that's where I think we've gone wrong in Western society, is we decided that we love democracy and everybody deserved to say, even people that don't have a reason to vote responsibly and actually think about the welfare, the well-being of society. The people that just want free stuff, they want their people group to have special privileges, they don't care about spending, it's just all about what they get now, or even, for themselves, potentially a few years down the road, but it's just about them. Unfortunately, when you don't have any sort of reason or capacity to think about things in the bigger picture, this is what you get in terms of your leadership. And think about even another thing, Rev, that you can think about, and I'm sure I'm boring the hell out of you and everybody else that's listening to this at this point, but you look at your two main choices, your Republican nominee and your Democratic nominee. It's not just that we've ended up with bad presidents. Look at who your choices have been. Even though I voted for Trump and I really wanted Trump to win this election somehow, even though I really didn't think it would happen, Trump is an egotistical jackass in terms of how he treats people. I mean, and maybe some people will disagree with that and say the media paints him that way, but that much of it is true, I think. Like, Trump got to where he got basically by appealing to people's emotions, not by his ability to think things out better. He would contradict himself on a regular basis and make himself look bad and make it easy for the media to convince people that he was a poor choice. So you look back at all of our presidential elections, what good candidates have we actually had? You've got Trump and Hillary, Sleepy Joe, Barack Obama, Romney, John McCain, who's a rhino. Romney's a rhino. How many decent candidates has either party fielded for these presidential elections for decades? You know, who is the last decent president or good president that we've had? You could argue Trump because he tried to do the right things in some ways, but you can just look at all the corruption, all the poor candidates that we've had. This is a result of our system in decline. Like you say, we are in a state of just catastrophic decline, and it's just going to continue to get worse. Reverend 20p says, I'd also like to hear you. I'm sorry, I'm losing my mind. I can't talk. I'd also like to hear your take on his essay in a future video or stream. Let me know. Yeah, you know, I saw your email inviting me to a stream, and I never responded to it. Who was it that... the Voice of Reason. You mentioned his channel. I hadn't watched much of his stuff, but I have since you sent me that email, so I am kind of interested in that. I don't know if he ever responded to that, but I would be willing to do that stream at some point, since I never actually responded to your email on that. But I actually watched his content for a period of a few days, and I think that would be an interesting stream. Reverend 20p says, 4+ years of full-on negative propaganda is a hell of a thing. Exactly. And like I said, I don't want to be too hard on your average voters, because a lot of them did vote for Trump in the end. So some of them saw through it. Because if the media had been fully effective, it would have been a landslide victory for Biden. But that definitely didn't happen. You know, the only argument I have with some Trump supporters seems to be, without all of this corruption, or whatever level of corruption is there, could Trump have won in some of these states? And, you know, it's not like Florida in 2000. Other than Georgia, it's not really super close. Like, Georgia and Arizona are pretty close. But Biden is supposedly ahead by a full percentage point in Pennsylvania and almost that much in Wisconsin. So that's really another part of my thinking, is just it's not that super close. It's close enough that you could make the argument that Trump should have won, but to me it's not that strong of a case, especially when you're going to court and you're having to prove that certain votes need to be thrown out, certain ballots. So I don't think that's going to happen. But yeah, the indoctrination was so strong in terms of how long it lasted and how united the media has been in their anti-Trump message. And even Fox News now, from what I've heard a lot of people say, and I haven't watched this much firsthand, but now Fox News, they seem to be basically joining the left. They're kind of still pretending to be conservative or on the right, I think. But I think they've changed ownership. They're not owned by News Corp or whoever owned them before. I think that's right. And now they're owned by Disney or whatever. So, you know, ABC. They're basically going to infiltrate Fox News with leftists now. I mean, it's kind of, that's what I've heard is in the process of happening. So I don't know. There's just very little mainstream conservative news outlets that reach anywhere near the number of people now compared to these leftist biased mainstream outlets that basically campaigned against Trump for 4+ years. So you're right, you know, and a lot of people did see through it, but a lot of people really joined the anti-Trump, we don't like Biden, but we're going to vote for him anyway type of thinking as well, including people, like I say, people I know personally. That was something that disappointed me, but it is what it is. Like I say, I don't think that I don't think that Trump or anybody else is going to turn things around overall in this society. I think we agree on that part of it, especially now that Trump's not going to be in office anyway, it looks like. Reverend 20p says, our modern choices for public office seem poor at best. Exactly. Like, maybe Reagan is the last really good president we've had. Maybe. But he actually increased the deficit to a large extent as well. So, but you take someone like Reagan and compare him to Trump. You know, they've been the last two really sort of galvanizing, powerful leaders on the right. If you go back, from now to Reagan, or you go back from 2020 to the 80s, those have been the two main, supposedly, conservative, if you want to call them that, leaders on the right. And you compare their personality types. Reagan was a really nice guy. He wasn't loud. He tried to appeal to people's sense of reason, I think, people's sense of, doing the right thing, unity. And you compare that to Trump now. And again, I'm not saying that Trump is bad. I'm not trying to admonish Trump here. I'm really not. But look at what is necessary to become president now as a conservative or as someone on the right politically, compared to Reagan's ability to do it in the 80s. Like, Reagan would have no chance to become president. Someone with that personality, I don't think, would have any chance to get elected now, because things continue to go downhill to the point where we have these really piss poor choices. That's why in 2016, I voted for Johnson, because I thought that he was the only one that actually had government experience that wasn't an awful choice. And my mind changed between 2016 and 2020. When I realized that Trump wasn't as bad as the media put him out, made him out to be. I wish that I had voted for Trump in 2016 as well. I really should have, looking back. But, I didn't realize that Trump was really one of the only people that could unite the right. So, and that wasn't enough to overcome all this indoctrination, plus a certain level of cheating and all that. That I agree that there's some evidence for that, but did it really swing the election? Or did stupid people voting swing the election? And that's honestly that's the opinion that I have, is that second possibility. Reverend 20p says, the voice of reason is game. Okay, I'll shoot you an email and we'll schedule that. Or you can shoot me an email in terms of what time you want to do that. Or what day, of course, along with that. But I never got back to you on that email, but I didn't forget about it. I was just kind of watching his content. I really hadn't watched his channel in the past. But, yeah, I think that would be a good conversation. The three of us doing a stream. But I'm wearing myself out, guys. Rambling on and on. But I just wanted to kind of make a video. Like I say, I mentioned that radio program that I heard at the beginning of the video here, where one of the analysts was talking about and making the comparison of beautiful women not having to grow up, just like some of these athletes that have a massive amount of talent not having to go up. But yeah, that was, I don't know, the Rev probably didn't catch the beginning part of that, but there was a radio program, a sports program that I listened to a couple nights ago, where one of the analysts was saying, he was talking about some of these athletes that are really talented. In particular, he was talking about James Harden. And James Harden's a basketball player for the Houston Rockets. And he was talking about Des Bryant, who's a receiver for the Ravens now in football, and how their talent was so great that they never really actually had to develop themselves beyond that. They're not really super skilled players. They just had a lot of talent, and they didn't really have to grow up in terms of managing how they treat people off the court and stuff like that. And this guy compared that to beautiful women in their 20s. I don't remember if he actually said in their 20s, but young, beautiful women who don't have to grow up and don't have to develop themselves because they have people that are constantly wanting to be with them and be around them. He actually said, but eventually, and I thought he was going to say they hit the wall, but he said father time catches up with them. And eventually they get to a point where they're, he implied that they get to a point where they're not that beautiful, and then they've not developed themselves and nobody wants to be with them. And it shocked me to some extent that anybody would have the balls to say that on a mainstream radio program and compare that to something like, sports athletes that are so talented that they don't really develop their skills or their personhood either. Like, that was the first point that I made in this video, the first issue that I wanted to talk about. But then, the other issue, like I say, was realizing through a helpful comment from Jack Harper that I read through, that my starting point on a lot of the thinking about this last election was just different, I think, than a lot of other Trump supporters. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe, Trump got cheated. Maybe that's the case. But my starting point was that Trump was a long shot to win, not only because of the polls, but because of everything that the media had indoctrinated people to think. And I didn't have faith in our voting system. I didn't have faith not only in the system, but in voters themselves. I didn't think that they would be smart enough to see through it after their reaction to things like the coronavirus, and after some of the members of my family mentioned, I'm against Trump. Trump is terrible. He wants to be a dictator. Okay. Actually, one of my relatives was saying that he is a dictator. And then I pointed out, well, if he's a dictator, why didn't he succeed at building the wall? Why didn't he succeed at repealing Obamacare? If he's a dictator, he should be able to do that, right? Oh, he just wants to be a dictator. I mean, so indoctrinated. And like I say, these people are intelligent when it comes to other things. But when it comes to politics, they are stupid. They have no idea what's going on. And because of factors like that, and already being at a point where I really didn't have faith in this whole political system anymore anyway. Already embracing things like MGTOW and just this idea that the system is so skewed and one-sided in a lot of ways that it really doesn't make sense to think that it can be fixed just because you vote for Trump. I really didn't think Trump would win anyway. And then he didn't. And it took me off guard a little bit when people said, well, Trump just got cheated. And I'm like, everybody, or not everybody, but a lot of people thought that Trump had it in the bag. And it's just like, I think there was an assessment that was done that overvalued the average voter's ability to see what was really going on and not just do what the media told them to do. So that was the main point that I wanted to get to. Again, I realize there's going to be disagreement on the level of fraud and cheating in the election in some cases, but that's okay. But like I say, my starting point, I think, was just different than a lot of the other Trump supporters. I never thought that people were gonna reelect him. I think he did well to make it as close as he did, to be honest. To me, the Democrats didn't have to cheat in the election itself because they've been cheating for the last 4 years in terms of how they've covered news, how they portrayed Trump versus other candidates or other potential candidates, and just their overall attitude toward Democrats and Republicans. I know that they've been indoctrinating people not only against Trump for 4 years, but against any sort of conservative political perspective because of their bias toward the left for decades, and it's just, did I think that the average American voter was going to see through that? No. To some extent, they did better than I thought they would. It was close, but, it's just, the outcome is disappointing, but it really didn't surprise me. And I don't really think Biden had to cheat to win. I really don't. In some cases, it may have happened, and you could argue that that was a factor, but I don't think they had to cheat to win. I think they've been cheating for 4 years through the message that they've been sending to people through television, through sort of the main, some of the main news aggregation websites. Like, you just go on Yahoo News, and all it is just a dumpster fire of leftist nonsense. I hate seeing that every time that I'm on that page, but there's only so much you could do to avoid it. So yeah, I never thought that it would work well. I didn't think that it would end well for Trump in this election. And maybe he got cheated and maybe he didn't, but I really didn't have faith that it would turn out better, honestly. I hate to be so pessimistic, but Reverend 20p says Tulsi Gabbard seems like a genuinely good candidate. The MGTOW folk may disagree, although I'm not on board with her anti-Second Amendment position. Yeah, I don't know how many people who watch my content do the whole I side with political stuff. The number of questions that they ask you, and they match the candidates in terms of how many issues you agree and disagree on. The number of questions now on there is insane. It's like probably well over 100 questions, maybe 150 to 200 questions that they ask, and you give your response, and then it tries to match you with the candidates. I don't know how accurate that is. It may be way off, but I don't agree with Tulsi Gabbard on hardly anything according to that. It basically shows her as being like every other Democrat, honestly. So I kind of have questioned, I haven't looked into it in detail, but I've questioned whether she is really any different than the other mainstream Democrats, because she may just be going out there and saying, oh, I'm different, look at me. But then, she kind of has a lot of the same views that other Democrats do. At this point, unless someone really not just portrays themselves, but really shows that they are different than the mainstream Democratic platform, I will not vote for any Democrats at this point. In some cases, like with our governor of Ohio, I will vote Libertarian when he runs again without much of a doubt. But I don't have faith in any sort of Democrat because, as I've explained in my other videos, they are all about separating people based on race, gender, and other factors, and I know that that's not going to be favorable to me, so I'm not going to vote for Democrats. And that Gabbard's from Hawaii. She's the one that's either a senator or a representative from Hawaii, right? If I remember that right. So I don't know. I haven't evaluated her too much, but I kind of figured that she's just like all the other Dems. But I haven't looked into it too much either, so I could be wrong. I side with could be completely biased in that regard. But and I know I side with is wrong part of the time, because they'll show either candidates being super far to the left or super far to the right, and it's just like they show Trump way out there in right field, and it's just like, no, Trump is really pretty moderate in terms of a lot of his policies. Aside from immigration, when it comes to a lot of his policies, Trump is pretty moderate. So there is at least some bias on that website. I may look to see what some of her stances are, but if she's pro-choice and against gun rights, and she's all for bigger government in other ways, then no thanks. But she could be better than that. I don't really know. Hashtag, I'm sorry, I'm reading something else. Code Quinn says the CNN is officially a propaganda machine. Yeah, it's the Clinton News Network or the Communist News Network, however you want to see it. That's pretty much what they are. One of the things that I've heard people say that are completely brainwashed in terms of their political views and voted for Biden and Harris as a result of being brainwashed is, well, they just show Trump talk. It can't be that CNN is biased. They show Trump saying something, and then they show him at another point saying something different and contradicting himself. And so it's not that CNN is biased. Trump really is that bad. It's like, okay, do they show all of Biden's gaffes? Because they could just run that through, and you would think that Biden needs to be put in a home by the time that you are done watching those clips. They choose to show Trump in the worst light possible. And yes, he lies. Yes, Trump contradicts himself. He makes it easy to do that. But, to show him in a negative light. But the media is still making a choice to do that. And they were just like, oh, CNN's not biased. It's like, for the people that think that CNN is just showing the truth and that they're not deliberately showing things the way they want people to see it, again, you can't reach these people. These people are the problem. These people voting are the problem. And, like I say, it's nice to think that they could see the light if they could just realize from any sort of balanced point of view that Trump was the better option. But they don't do their own research. They don't do their own thinking. They just go along with whatever they see and whatever they're told to think when it comes to their political views. They go with their emotions. They don't do an assessment. It's sad, but there are enough people that are like that to swing the election over to Biden, in my opinion. Even with some of the corruption and the fraud or whatever, that's my take on what happened. It was close, but it was still enough of an indoctrination effort and success to get that result. Reverend 20p says, fair enough on Gabbard. She may have fooled me. Well, like I say, I haven't really researched her a whole lot. I just noticed that when you put all the potential candidates on your sort of match list, and it's, again, this is not a foolproof program. I side with, I think, is isidewith.com. If you look at that, you can go through a huge list of questions, and they'll try to match you with candidates. But some of the questions I actually didn't fill out. Like, I put my own answer, which it really doesn't count in its calculation, because some of them was like, do you think that struggle snuggle should be marital struggle snuggle should be punished the same as regular struggle snuggle? And I hope you know what that's a key term for what I'm referring to there. Should marital struggle snuggle be punished as severely? And my response is, don't get married. Because all of the answers assume that it's just like, oh yeah, it's just as bad. Just being married doesn't change that. And then one of them said, it should be classified as domestic violence instead. And it's like, no, just don't get married. That's the best answer I can give to that. Nothing else is going to be an accurate match to what I believe. There was another question, like the gay marriage question. My answer is, marriage should be a contract like any other contract, but it shouldn't be the way that it is, basically, with the government. So some of the questions I didn't even match on at all, in other words. So there's some problems, there are some flaws within their system. But like I say, I don't really know too much about Gabbard other than it showed that she disagreed with a lot of my views on that I Side With website. Code Quinn says, I got tired sharing the whole video of there were fine people on both sides. There was no racism on that video, but every Democrat uses it for a reference. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what video you're talking about, but I imagine that's an attempt to try to make Trump look like a racist in that video, and it's just, what has Trump said that's racist? I can understand the whole sexist thing to some extent with the whole grab him by the pussy thing. Okay, all right, that's not a nice statement, and you could say that that's sexist. A lot of it is BS in terms of how that doesn't really prove a whole lot, but ultimately, do you really think that he's racist? Like, what has he actually said that's racist? Well, he's not racist. There's no evidence that Trump is racist. It's just that he doesn't agree with treating people of certain races, people that are ethnic minorities, differently than white people. He doesn't want to say that they're victims somehow. So now he's racist because he doesn't want to give them special privileges. That's honestly how I see that aspect of it. But they're going to just keep up with that because that's the whole Democratic Party platform now. Basically, that's one of the main things that they preach, is that you have all these oppressed people, and the government needs to step in to help them. You know, feminism, BLM, LGBTQ, all this stuff. It's just like some of these organizations or movements started out with realistic, legit goals, and some of them didn't. But, you know, not BLM really. But it's all it's about now is you have to believe that this group of people is victims and this other group has been oppressing them, or you're bad, you're racist. So, yeah, you know, it defies logic and reason, but again, people, your average voters, don't necessarily see through it. I'm going to wrap this video up. I've been going at it for kind of longer than I intended, but I do want to read through some of these comments. The comments have been good on this video. I might try to do a Saturday night video in the future. Reverend 20p says, I may be partially biased on Gabbard due to her military background or service. It always pissed me off that guys like Clinton, Cheney, and John Bolton were draft dodgers. Yeah, I can understand that from your perspective, for sure. The man with no name. Hey, CL, what's up? I'm just now noticing that you're making comments. We will be life imitating art 1984 before you can say massively overhyped flu bug. Yeah, you know, I don't know how things will be once they do get a cure for this. I don't know whether they'll make people get the vaccine or not. This could be years from now, honestly. Everybody wants to say this vaccine that Pfizer is coming out with is going to be the solution. We'll see. We'll see how it does with the trials and whatnot, but the whole process is going to take time. Probably it's going to be a few years until everybody gets the medication, if you want to call it a medication, the vaccine. Maybe it won't take that long. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but it's just so dumb because we're not gaining anything. People act like, you know, and I'm sure you've heard about virtue signaling before. That's all that people are saying. Stay at home, save lives, and wear a mask, save lives. They're virtue signaling. They're not doing anything to actually improve the situation at hand. They're not doing anything to help anybody. They just feel better about themselves, and they can feel self-righteous. I see a lot of this. People that are self-righteous because they're wearing a mask and they're staying home. Congratulations, you're putting businesses out. You know, you're taking small businesses and making it so that they can't get by because you don't go out and patron their businesses anymore. Good job. You know, like, what are you doing to actually help people? But people feel like they're doing something, and our leaders can use that to take advantage of them and do the thing that the government is best at doing, which is taking people's rights away and pretending like it accomplishes something. So, yeah, you know, I think that a lot of it will get undone. I hope, I'm optimistic, if you want to call it that when we do get a cure, people will insist that they should go back to normal. But maybe it won't happen that way. Maybe I'm being too optimistic about that. Dan W. says, when you are a Democrat, your choices of content ensure that all you ever get served is Democrat-filtered news and options. makes it almost impossible for one to change one's mind. Yeah, that's true. Absolutely. To an extent, if you're only watching right-wing news sources too, you can probably kind of construct your own bubble. But I think you actually have to put some more effort into doing that, because you're always going to have your mainstream leftist news that's available. So you're almost always going to have to listen to the leftist opinions no matter what, which is a huge advantage, obviously, that they have. So, yeah, I think that basically that's correct. You can just ignore any sort of alternate opinion when you're a leftist, because most of the news around you is leftist news, and you can find more of it, but you can avoid the conservative point of view very easily. I think that's true, yeah. CL says, Dan, I loathe these Democrat order followers. Yeah. Like I say, a big part of it is that they want to feel better about themselves. And like I say, you look at something like Hurricane Katrina, and I don't know that a lot of other people make this connection, but you look at the aftermath of Katrina, and you see where a lot of people, and this is 15 years ago, it wasn't forever ago, you see a lot of people who blame the government for a hurricane coming through and devastating an area that's below sea level. And yes, you could look and you can say FEMA could have done this better. This should have happened. Like, the government could have done a better job. All right, fair enough. Why do you expect the federal government to rescue you from a hurricane when you live below sea level? Especially a major, powerful hurricane that has a direct hit on your area. For all the hurricanes that came through in this hurricane season, none of them really seemed to do that much damage, at least not all the ones that, out of all the hurricanes that hit Louisiana, it didn't seem to be anything like Katrina, at least. But what do you expect the government to do? Magically, cast a spell that makes the hurricane go somewhere else? Cast a spell to remove all the floodwaters? That's dumb, but yet you look back and all kinds of people expected the federal level of government to come down there and fix everything. Well, it doesn't happen that way. That's dumb. But yet you look at that, and then you look at our leaders now, I think they look at something like the coronavirus and say, oh shit, we're going to be blamed for this. We're going to be held responsible. And so we need somebody else to take the heat. We need somebody else to take the blame, because we don't want it to be us. We won't be able to stay in office. We won't be able to maintain our power. People may even, go out and actually do violent things, because we see this all the time too. People may actually go out and start, acting in a way that breaks the law, or that is civil disobedience, or whatever you want to call it. Let's focus the blame on people who aren't wearing a mask. Let's focus the blame on people who refuse to stay at home because they're bad. Make it their fault so that they take the heat, and then ultimately we look like we're good, and all we're really doing is taking people's rights away. But we look like we're doing something, and people get to feel like they're doing something. So let's go ahead and set all this up so that we can look like we're actually doing a good job, and all we're really doing is taking people's right to make this kind of choice away from them about wearing a mask and staying home. That's what I think a lot of it really is. Our leaders know that the people are stupid, and that they're going to want someone to blame, and they don't want it to be them. And they don't mind taking people's rights away to begin with. So that's kind of I know I've discussed all this kind of stuff before, but that's what I see going on. I don't think they necessarily planned it, but they knew that they had to direct the sort of anger in one direction, and they don't want it to be directed at them, so you need to find somebody else to blame. That's the people that aren't wearing masks. That's the people that aren't staying home. That's the people that aren't social distancing themselves from others. It's retarded. It's just dumb for something that is not really much more deadly than what certain strains of the flu are, and only really affects people that have compromised systems or that are really old. And we can care about those people, but to completely shut things down and drastically hurt our economy for that, it's just like, that's not smart. That's not good policy, in my opinion. Dan W. says, in my case, I first fell in love with Trump's way of dealing with China and became a pro-Trump Democrat, but after a while I realized everything Democrat is fanatical and corrupt. Yeah, the Democratic Party, in my view, has really shifted over the past several decades from actually representing working class people to basically, and I discussed this, if you look at my video, I don't know if you've seen this, if you watched this video that I did on the Democratic Party and the things that a lot of people don't realize. The Democratic Party does not care about working people anymore. And I'm not saying the Republican Party always does either. But the Democratic Party is all about, we can make you a victim group and then sell you free stuff in return for your votes. Based on race, gender, whether you are pro-LGBTQ or not. If you support this one group of people or certain groups of people, or you fall into those categories, you are one of those people, then, that's who the Democrats represent. They don't represent the working class people anymore. And a lot of people, I'm not saying that you were this way, but a lot of people don't realize that. They don't realize that the Democrats now, they're not about working class people's interests and the policies that they want and a fair deal between labor and business. It's about, do you fall into the victim category or not? Do you want special privileges? Will you vote for us if we give you those things? That's really all the Democratic Party is today, and it's not good. I wouldn't recommend voting for a Democrat in almost any situation unless you know someone's really an exception somehow to that rule. CL says, and wrong upside down evil. At least Trump likes them with hair on their hoo-hoo. On their hoo-ha, yeah. Okay. I don't know what Trump likes or doesn't like in terms of that. He seems to like women too much sometimes, I think. But Dan W. says, yep, it doesn't feel evil when you're on the inside, but it is. Yeah, again, like a lot of people I know, they think the Democratic Party is the Democratic Party of like the 70s or even before then. And they don't realize how political times have changed. I don't know, what age category that you fall into, but I see that with a lot of the older Democrats. They don't realize they've been disenfranchised. And then some of them eventually become Republicans because they realize, well, I may not really completely fit in with the Republican Party. And that's, the Republican Party is more complicated because you have different factions, basically. So a lot of the time, different Republicans don't see things eye to eye. It's kind of a weakness within the right today, within the Republican Party, because you have your small government conservatives, your pro-business conservatives, your religious right conservatives. It's not like the left. The left is just, we're going to split you into victim groups and oppressor groups and use Marxism basically as our unifier. That's what, in my opinion, the Democrats have become. But I hope that more people will wake up to that, but I'm not optimistic because, again, the media is still in the pocket of the Democrats to a large extent. Reverend 20p says, grab him by the pussy at the Diamond Cabaret. Well, I'm going to try to wrap this stream up here. I don't think I'm going to go through and read all of these comments. Sorry to say that. Maybe I can here pretty quickly. Code Quinn says, another shutdown will destroy the economy. Very disappointed Trump lost. I thought people valued freedom. Nope. People don't realize that Trump represents any sort of freedom. They're just, again, they just believe orange man bad, and then they don't care about anything else. sadly. Man with no name, CL says, this 4 to 6 month strict lockdown will solve everything. Yeah. Yeah, it'll resolve a lot. What would happen is, of course, the incidence of viruses would go down, and then all these virtue signalers would pat themselves on the back about how good they and their fellow Americans are for not having the right to leave their home for 4 to 6 months, except, for justifiable, official reasons or whatever. And then, guess what? When people go back out, the virus spreads again. Good job. You really gain a whole lot by doing that. Code Quinn says Fox News is now leaning left. Yeah, it seems to be that way. And CL says this mask thing is from now forward. Don't bother wishing Ohio Dan. Things aren't going back to normal. Well, I hope that that's not the way it turns out. I hope that people realize there's no good excuse at that point, but I might be wrong. Well, guys, I think there's a lot of other messages here. I think I'm kind of tapping out at this point with this stream. But thanks for watching. I hope you guys got something out of it. I hope you guys enjoyed the stream and the conversation. And like I say, I realize there's some differences of opinion in terms of the way that I see the results of this election versus other Trump supporters. But again, I think my starting point was that as that good comment from Jack Harper got me thinking about, I had already given up on the system. I didn't think Trump would win anyway, because I think that, my thought was the only reason he won in 2016 is because he went against Hillary, and things look worse in this election. And I think that all the brainwashing that the media did had its effects. So again, guys, I hope that you guys have a good night. I'm not sure how long to make these streams, but I've been at it for over 2 hours. But if you have any additional comments, you can leave it on the video after it's posted. And I hope you guys have a good weekend, and I'll talk to you all later. Thanks for contributing to the stream. Thanks to Heart Donor, Reverend 20 Piece, Dan W, CL, Code Quinn, all you guys. Appreciate your contributions, and I'll talk to you guys later, probably on another stream or on another video. So again, have a good weekend, and have a good night.